found it. Rebirth Podcast. I'm so glad you're here. And I'm bringing you right into my world. I'm Kate Breton, the founder and author of Rebirth, the podcast, and the book, which you can get in your local community or order online. Here, I like to say, we are focusing on a high inspiration diet. Life is hard enough, so we want to ingest positivity and stories of others and insights that we can bring into our field of vision to better our day and increase the chances of us remembering to be the best version of ourselves. Not that that's going to be the same version every day, but as long as we're endeavoring to it, right? So there's a lot of things I could say about our guest today. I've known her for 20 plus years. I was her next door neighbor. That's how we became friends. Her name is Angelo. I'm going to pick this title. She's a change practitioner. Now, she's a program manager for the Maine chapter of Alzheimer's Association. Now, ever since I've known Amy, she's been a champion for the elderly in a way that was quite mind-boggling for her presence as a 20-year-old. But in this podcast, I learned the inception of that. I also write on Substack, The Golden Thread, and it's this idea that's always fascinating to me, that these golden threads of purpose and presence and things that we might not have seen, but then when we have the grace of living a long enough life or getting perspective of a moment, we can pan out our perspective and see this tapestry. This podcast is definitely an honoring of life's tapestry. We talk about Alzheimer's, we talk about the elderly, we talk about her journey, and we talk about, because of her vast wisdom and philosophy and being a seeker or a student. I think for Amy, I would pick the word student, a student of life and life's wisdom, especially and when it comes to Vedic studies, how she talks about the clearing and creating that each soul is here to do. So make sure you stay to hear at the end when she shares her insights that are spontaneously overlapped in the moment. And that is what we want to focus in on as season 7 starts to wind down, that we are here to educate and elevate. And now with that education and elevation, we are beckoning, welcoming, and calling in more and more alignment. We know that we have a journey. We're here, we're human, to create and to clear, to be as present as we can with others and ourselves. And I don't know about you, but for me, when I get that feedback, when the serendipities line up, when the overlaps of meaning happen, it gives me fuel to keep going in faith that we have a reason that we're here. Yeah, you have a reason you're here, and only you can do it. And we're cheering you on. So enjoy this episode with Amy. She gives you resources at the end. If you or someone you love is meeting the moment with Alzheimer's, there are so many resources I didn't even know. If you want to stay tuned in my inspiration, go to katebreton.com, hop on the newsletter, or jump onto my Substack, The Golden Thread. We're going to be having some summer sessions for creatives. So thanks for tuning in and enjoy the podcast. We're recording this on the new moon eclipse. It's a hybrid eclipse. This apparently hasn't happened in our lifetime and will not most likely again. And I'm not an astrologer, but nothing in the past couple of years has ever happened before. Hopefully will never happen again, right? We are in this moment. Okay. So today is supposed to be this, kind of moving into a different place. And this is a theme. Look at this. This is organically arising. I pushed our podcast half an hour because of mowing the lawn. And then I'm like, okay, I don't want to wait anymore. You know what I mean? Because we have a window. And it's literally as soon as we hit record, I get a text that says, I'm not going to do the back right now. I'm going to wait. I'm like, yeah, that is what I want to talk about, is trusting timing. And when we overexert ourselves in trying to make everything line up, we kind of actually miss the timing. So I am here with Amy Angelo. Thanks for making the time to be with us, Amy.
Thank you for having me here.
Mm-hmm. You've done a lot of things, but right now you're the program manager for the Maine chapter of the Alzheimer's Association. So you manage all of the care and support efforts for the volunteers, education, and Alzheimer's throughout the state, and manage 30 support groups for early stage social engagement programs. So I'm going to ask about early stage and Alzheimer's and how you got here. Give us a little bit of why you're working with this group of people.
why. So I'm
Mhm.
a social worker.
Mhm.
But even prior to that world, I used to volunteer with my mom.
You did?
Yeah. We delivered home delivered meals. And yeah, and I would go with her to, drop off the meals, and we'd interact with the older adults, and I just really had an affinity for them. And they're just so authentic and real and funny. And then, you know, talk about like coincidence or not. My internship in social work school was at Older Adult Protective Services. And yeah, got to see like all of the things someone might experience as they age, um, that often is not their fault, or fault of
Mm,
anybody, just
mm,
is.
mhm.
And, having to step in and intervene and to keep them safe. And then fast forward, well,
Um, Wait, actually, I'm not going to pause you because I've known you for a long time personally, right?
yes.
And so when you interact, and that was like 20s
Okay. We known
for
each other.
us. Yeah,
Yeah.
right. We were like
22.
20, like, oh, we're doing our new thing, like we're, trying out adulthood. And if you're in your 20s, listen, which I have that, you are an adult, but the further you adult, you find out that nobody really knows how to adult. And when you thought you were adulting, you were kind of it was just in a different phase, right? It's like in the exuberance phase. Is that
Oh,
fair to say? Okay.
yeah.
So I remember you coming home because I was your neighbor. That's how we
Yes.
met. I was your
Yes.
neighbor. And I remember you coming home. And I think when we hear adult protective services, there's like this protective curtain in there is a curtain in the languaging. So people can kind of be like, oh, that sounds hard. Um,
Mm,
so can you tell us a little bit about what you saw with
mm.
protecting the integrity of whomever story it was, but
Yeah.
can you give us a little bit of insight into that?
Yeah, of course. So, well, protective services happen throughout the country, and usually they're connected with Area Agency on Aging's. And um, what you see as an investigator, in quotes, is you're investigating elder abuse, neglect, and exploitation. So you see, number one actually is self-neglect,
Mm.
because as you age, you may lose the ability to take care of yourself in ways that you had before, and you don't necessarily realize it.
That's the
So,
piece, isn't it?
yeah, so your quality of life and your quality of care for yourself diminishes. And sometimes, the mind goes and you forget to take your medicine. So then you get sick, or you forget to pay your bills. So then things get shut off. You forget to
Hmm.
eat, like there's a lot there.
Hmm.
Um, you could be cooking and you leave the stove on. Many things could happen to present danger,
Hmm.
and so we get reports and we would intervene. There's that, and then there's like neglect and abuse of family or caregivers,
Hmm.
all to see. Um, I mean, I was in Philadelphia, all of
Yeah.
Philadelphia County. It
Hmm.
was a little rough sometimes, all the stuff, like there'd be drugs. I'd be walking in drug houses. Someone would be upstairs, like grandma would be upstairs in the bedroom with bed sores and just laying there, not having been fed.
Hmm.
Um, well, family or whoever is taking their social security check and using it to buy drugs and smoking crack downstairs as I'm upstairs. That was intense. But financial abuse also is huge. People taking advantage, people who,
You don't even think, I shouldn't say, it's not something I think about. I mean, I know not entirely true, but it's not a cultural conversation. We kind of push
yeah,
those two ends of the spectrum away from the community conversation. And I think part of why we do it is like, we don't want to think about it.
yeah, nobody wants to think
Nobody
about
wants to think
aging
about it.
or
No, right?
all the things that could happen. Yeah.
So it's interesting to me that your mom, who's no longer physically with us, but I know is very much with us in a lot of ways, is the person that brought you through into meeting and the meals and working with elders. I didn't even know that.
And then grandma, her mom,
Uh-huh.
lived with us when she had Alzheimer's as well.
Oh, she did.
Yes.
So
So I
you
was
had
very
her.
close with my grandmother. And yeah, I was in 8th grade, the summer before 9th grade when she passed away. And yeah, it was, and the story there is that she was in a nursing home, which we prolonged placing her. She had lived with us and it was just became too much. She would get out and wander, and that's a whole other story. But despite any of our efforts to keep her safe, we had to eventually place her. And this awful. And looking back, I don't know if this is why I went into protective services, or I, unconsciously was there, but she was in a facility and I think you might know the story. We were visiting her for dinner, and she was sitting in her chair, and the people came in and gave her her meal. And we went back the next day
Oh,
around 10
wow.
a.m.
Okay, so tell me about your grandmother.
Well, she had Alzheimer's. She started early with dementia and had it for a few years, and we tried to care for her in the other, house that she was in. And then she came to live with us because she needed 24-hour care. And it just became too much because she would, try to get out. And we, at the time, didn't really have a lot of education and
Sure.
support around Alzheimer's. So we tried to do our best to keep her safe, but she would sometimes get out of the house, and that's a whole other story. But
Right.
we eventually placed her in a nursing home. And I don't know if this is why, unconsciously, I went into older adult protective services. That was my first, social work job out of school. But my mother and I went to see her one night for dinner, and they had brought her food. She was sitting in a chair, looking out the window and having her dinner. And we left her to go back in the morning around 10:30. And she was sitting in the same chair with the same tray in front of her, in front of the air conditioning. And she had soiled herself. And her last words were, "I'm so cold." She was then taken to the hospital. She had pneumonia. She was in intensive care, and she passed away.
What's her name?
Margaret Fear.
It's fascinating how, when you look back at what you're doing, the thread that brings this moment,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I wouldn't make that assumption, but the 3 generations of women in this story, right, that your mom had you working with other elders, not even with the meals, right? So like that was your mom's passion. Your mom is such a cool lady. She's such a cool lady. And that moment with your grandmother, we can also pause in this moment, and because I know you, and I'm sort of steering the conversation a little bit for the listener for sure, but you also have a philosophy of interconnectedness, right? So it would seem that I heard you say, like, who knows if subconsciously this is what brought me. But I remember being in my 20s. And at that point, in that moment, I wasn't doing my like work. And I remember I was still in like some mimicry. Like I was working like for like a software company. I don't remember the exact jobs, but I know in living in the house where I was your neighbor, I transitioned from the corporate work to heading into teaching and stuff. But
you were writing.
I was, but here's the thing. I remember when we were all hanging out and you would be talking about like protecting elders. Like we were like, I was like, I have a cell phone. I don't know how to use it, and you're like, I rescued somebody from a crack house today. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, how are we in this? You've had this warriorship for elder ever since I've known you. And even when it wasn't I had the intelligence to hear what you're saying, and I enjoyed where I was in my life. It was just interesting, the wisdom you had at what I would perceive has been a younger age. But then when you hear the backstory of that stewardship, the passion makes a lot more sense. Yeah.
Okay. Always with the goosebumps, I tell you.
But that's fascinating to me, because I think here is a little behind the scenes. A lot of times when I reach out to people I know to be on the podcast, they're like, I don't know what I would have to say. And I'm like, I'm telling you, I don't know either what it is, but there's something good that everyone has to know. And I think in this, in looking at what you do, to hear program director of a chapter in Maine of Alzheimer's is inaccessible to most minds because they don't want to hear it.
Hmm. Yeah, well, I find like doing the education throughout the state, it's very interesting, and similar to other things, that those who want the information are open to it, and those that aren't open to it don't want the information. And it's about making it accessible and in a non-threatening way, because there still is stigma around this dementia Alzheimer's.
Well, yeah, because
And
who wants to lose their mind?
correct.
I mean,
And
I'm just going to say it,
a
right?
lot
Like,
of people, yeah, a lot of people think it's like on them, that they did something wrong, they lived an unhealthy life, something, but that is not the case. It's in some cases genetic, there's deterministic genes, there's risk genes, risk factors that, go beyond our control. And you could live the healthiest life, eat the correct diet, get enough sleep, exercise, and still develop Alzheimer's.
what do you think is the gift? And I'm not trying to be Pollyanna about it. That's not the right word. What do you think is the wisdom? Like, what have you learned by working with this population? Like, you know how people want to hear it from like a kindergartner, or there's a woman that I don't know her. She's on Instagram and she does hospice and she shares like stories. So she's not glorifying, she's not sharing who the patients are, right? But she's just like, things I'm learning by being in this world. So whatever our craft is or our passion is, we learn something by being submerged, because no matter how open we are as humans, we just don't have enough time to submerge ourselves into all the worlds, right? Like that's why we cross pollinate. So
Right.
this is more what I'm asking is, you're submerged in this world. What are the what are the gem pockets or the wisdom that you're being gifted by being of service to this world?
I feel like I'm in service by like just showing up with information and with kindness.
Mm-hmm.
Truly, it's all we could do really to help, is to support
Mm-hmm.
and, educate, and then support, and then, love in a loving way, because in the end,
Mm-hmm.
that's all that matters. It doesn't, all the things that we think, matter. When if you don't have the ability to remember all of those things that we think matter, like, if the mind doesn't recall why you should do X, Y, and Z, or, what you wanted to do tomorrow, all that you have is really the moment that you're in. And how do you want to interact with somebody in the moment? Because that's it. That's all somebody who has dementia has. That, I mean, and sometimes, there's not even an ability to connect, but they, showing up in a loving, kind, open way is more perceived by somebody. That emotional, the nonverbal language is more perceived.
Intentionality is perceived. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, even if you have the best of intentions and you know, communicate in like, say, a non, or in not a non-threatening way, or, on their level that they accept, it doesn't get through. So just, I mean, really being in the moment.
How does
And
it not drain you to be around death?
I mean, it doesn't, just because, and this is gonna sound, like,
Mm-hmm.
right, but it's transformation. And I feel like as long as you process your emotions, because it's sad, I mean, when somebody, even just when, so I'm a death doula as well, but that aside, but like the Alzheimer's piece of it, when you have that, they say it's like the long goodbye, because you're grieving every single day. Every day there's a different loss, and you lose over and over again, like the caregiver and the person with the disease. So you have to do something with those emotions, because it's sad and
Yeah.
it's hard, but you have to feel it, you have to process it, and so you could show up for the
Yeah.
next moment, you know.
So we talked about your mom, but we also could talk about your dad, huh?
We can.
Yeah. How does he play into the stewardship that you have now with Alzheimer's?
It's funny. So when before so my dad was diagnosed with dementia, vascular dementia, and then Alzheimer's type. And before he even came to live with me, I was volunteering for the Alzheimer's Association in Pennsylvania in advocacy. And so I'd go to DC and, march on the Hill and do all the things and talk to my congressman. And it was really to advocate for more funding for research and home and community-based services like funding and stuff. So, I didn't even know half of what the Alzheimer's Association did. And like, I didn't know they had support groups. I didn't know they had education. I mean, I guess I knew, but it wasn't
Right.
I didn't know about it at the time. And then he came to live with me. And then it's like I forgot all of it, that they were even around, And so like the last 10 months of his life when we were living in Phoenix, I was his, primary caregiver. I wasn't working. I was just caring for him full time. And all of the things they say about caregiving is true. You do feel socially isolated. You do, it's draining. It takes a toll on your health. But it's really all that you want to do. You
Right.
want to be there and you don't want to place them, and it's a double-edged sword. But
How did your dad get from Pennsylvania to Phoenix?
with me.
You what?
He moved with me.
he got a road trip, didn't he?
He flew. Yeah, and he was very excited about it. So first he came to live with me, about an hour south of where he was living in Pennsylvania, and he was in the PACE program of all-inclusive care for the elderly. That's where I used to work, and he would come to the day center with me and get all of his medical care and socialization there, which was fantastic. It allowed me to work. However, it got to the point where I was not really able to manage it in the evenings, and like there was a gap in care and in the timing. And so when the opportunity came to go to Phoenix, it seemed like a good time to take him. And it was warm there, hot there, and he loves that. And so I just said, okay, let's do this. And we moved to Phoenix, and I cared for him for 10 months before he passed away there. And he died. He ended up dying of bladder cancer, but he was entering into the late stages of Alzheimer's at that time.
When you look back, we recently had a conversation about purpose and passion, and I asked you, like, well, what do you need to do, with this light? Like, what you were like, I'm doing it. There was such a peace.
I must say that, yes, working with the association now is truly what I feel like I'm to do, at least now.
What's funny though is the tears. I don't know why this is happening, but I think it's because like I didn't cry for 10 years, but I was like the stoic person, but they're not. It's like when you read a good sentence, tears. They're not sad tears. They're not.
Yeah.
It's this expanse of the way you were sitting there and you were like, I'm doing it. And I don't know if this is what midlife is, because I've only consciously have had one midlife. I'm sure I've been there before, but I don't remember the notes that I took. And so I think I'm feeling into this, like, in a positive sense. Like if you were like,
Yeah.
okay, I'm going on vacation and I have 5 more days on this vacation. Like, what do I want to do in the last 5 days? You're not upset. You're just like, I would like to plan so I enjoy this limited amount
Yeah.
of time. Like, that's how I'm seeing my life. Like, what, you don't ever really know when you're going to die, but you have to live. I think you have to live optimistically and joyously. So it's not from fear. It's just like, if I'm going to guess, what can I do with this time? And I'm finding myself very intrigued to be asking people these questions, because that's just how my mind works. Like, I just
Okay.
like hearing about that. And so it's fascinating because one of the ways that I know you is I'm kidding, but there was so many of us that were just running around in our 20s having a very 20s existence, and then all of a sudden you had to like bring in wisdom and health and spirituality and kitchery and yoga. My first bowl of kitchery. And this is sort of like my pattern of learning. Like, something new
Yeah.
comes in that's disruptive, I sarcastically tempt myself with it, dance around it, and then fully dive into it, right? So I have to like shun it and make sarcasm, and then I like participate. And that's my joke about the kitchery. But I I see a parallel in the personality of being like, I mean, you were having fun with all of us too. I'm not putting you in a corner of like, you weren't being the fun
Sure
20-year-old.
was.
You were having a great time. I mean, there was a fullness of living. But I look at how you were like a bridge walker for a lot of us. You know what I mean? Like, you were kind of held that space and you're like, oh, we should try, we all tried yoga together and we all did these things that like were part of this thread that started to move through. And I know that when you went on to get further degrees, I remember it slightly differently, that I'm like, oh, she's doing like Ayurveda in her master's program. You're like, I'm not doing that. But like, you are, you know what I mean? Like, I know that isn't officially on paper. Ayurveda is this, the science and the study of life through like a foundation of Vedic philosophy, which is way more expansive than just doing yoga poses. Okay. So we're talking about philosophy and diet and perspective. And it's not so much I'm trying to rewrite your resume, but for as long as I've known you, there has been an attention to those structural philosophies.
Yeah.
And I think that is, even without being named Ayurveda, you are a soul that has been attuned to that, because from a young age, you were open to eldership, right? Like, that's not everyone's role. Like, I loved elders in a different way because I was raised by my grandparents, half C's, they were, so I had a lot of respect for what you were doing with elder, also because of my younger years, just knowing that like my grandparents were like extra parents, you know what I mean? They weren't removed from me. So I want to kind of bring this moment into, we have this culture, so you can take this anywhere, but we have this culture that's, we came to, we see, there seems to be a bunch of us that dive deep, and then there's this extrapolation on the social media that takes the depth and makes it very a veneer. You hear Ayurveda and you think somebody probably would tell me like, oh, I have an Ayurveda perfume. I'm like, I'm not even talking about your essential oil.
Sure.
I mean, have a great time with it. But how have you seen those threads braid for you? Like, how did you get started in yoga? Like, how does that inform, even if it's not, you're in Maine doing a chapter work with Alzheimer's. So I'm not assuming that you're bringing something in that's out of the vernacular of the people that you serve. That's not what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I'm saying there's an internal essence that permeates. And when that happens, you can use any metaphor. You don't even have to mention Ayurveda. You can just, right. So that is what I would like to hear a little bit about that journey, because you've been in the public sector and you've been in service in a lot of different places. So how is that living and coexisting inside of you? How did it start?
Okay, so I'm like going back to that question. What was the
how did that come into your life?
Yeah, gosh, I ended up taking a yoga class as literally it was the first class that I took in my undergrad program at Temple University at 8:00 in the morning, the first class ever in college. It was a yoga class for
No
credit.
way.
Yeah. And it kind of changed my understanding of what I thought yoga was. And it helped me because I had really bad anxiety that first year of college. And I took that crocodile pose into my dorm and did it every single day because
Really?
it was the only thing, yes, it was the only thing that would like stop my palpitations. Yes. Yeah. And then, I discovered Garland of Letters, and I would just go in and I would, yeah, on South Street. And I would just go in and like, that section of like all the Indian books, like that are from India. I would go
Yeah,
in and like touch the paper because it was different paper and it smelled
it
different and it
did.
was all in Sanskrit. And I couldn't understand it, but I knew I wanted to. I knew there was, a connection with those books somehow. And I would just spend a lot of time, and I'd get like the other books that I could understand and read. And I started there. And then my Ukrainian mama, when I was working at Protective Services, took me to see Deepak Chopra when he was in Philly, and blew my mind, blew it wide open. And I remember there were seats empty down front, and I, at the intermission, went down and sat right in front of him and was like this. And then I went to his Center for Wellbeing when it was in La Jolla, and I got all the books on Ayurveda. I had no idea what it was, really. I just knew I heard him talk about it. Got all the books, went home, listened to all the things. And then fast forwards, and hadn't really been doing yoga, not taking a class or anything, but then moved to Manayunk and was going for a walk on Main Street and saw Yoga on Main and picked up a schedule and said, oh, this is it. I'm going to start taking classes. Walked in, Shivadas, first class, met Ed Zadlow teaching,
Right.
signed up for his Vedanta class. That was it. I was a sponge. And then he taught the Ayurveda, and it resonated because I think there were seeds being planted, but those concepts of, Vata Pitta Kapha and the doshas and the, tamas, ragas, and, sattva really resonated with like life and your ability to get things done in the world. If you're too tamasic, things are like crazy, and
Yeah.
you're spinning and fiery, and you have to get to a place of sattva to be clear. And you talk about the other degrees and stuff, and like, no, I didn't study Ayurveda, but I went and got the degree in organizational dynamics, and just that the words are
Where did you get that?
University of Pennsylvania.
I'm sorry, could you say that again?
The University of Pennsylvania.
We were all so
Really
proud of you.
great program, really great program. And so I got like certificates in leadership and change practitioner. So change.
I was gonna say, I
It
think I might.
happens as we age at every step of
I
our
think
age.
that's the overarching theme for you, right? You're a change practitioner.
And I hate change. I am a Taurus. So I am not good with it yet. I feel like at some point there was a realization that it was needed, and I have this very still not clear relationship with change, but I don't feel like I man it. I know that it is necessary, though I fight it internally, and then it's not as easeful as it could be. Now, if you
Mm-hmm.
think like, a dying process, I've
Yeah.
seen many people pass away, pass on, and transform, and it never looks the same. Some people struggle, like, and this is not a conscious thing. Like, you can't consciously manage this. But my mother passing away, very struggled, like fought. My father's passing was extremely peaceful. He just let go. So my mother was holding on. And this is, they say you die as you live, but I don't know if that's true. It's hard to say, but I do know that, again, all you could do is support it, show up in the moment lovingly, and just be there, just be a presence.
Do you think you can cultivate a conscious, I understand that you can't plan for it, but do you think that there is a cultivation that you can do in living
Sure.
to be more friendly with death?
I think you could certainly try. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, because, you take the little laboratory of the yoga mat. How do you go about your practice? And then at the end, there's the Shavasana, final resting pose. Can you completely let go into the moment? Can you just relinquish everything? I think I like to think that helps. And then just extrapolate it into like the day.
Mm-hmm.
Can you rest at night? Did you do your work enough and in an easeful way? Without the mind, too much activity of the mind. Can you lie down and rest?
I mean, that's probably the most profound piece of it. Yeah. In a memoir I just finished, it's not worth getting deeply into it, but basically she says to her, like, she calls her intuitive therapist, and she says, I keep getting up at 3:00 in the morning, and the therapist is like, well, that's because there's a ghost following you, and the woman wants it to be somebody else, and the therapist says, no, that's the part of you that just won't let go. And so it's just a fascinating that you're laying the same imagery, on top with all that you've traversed and learned, and that idea of, life is what stira and sukham, right? It's like you have to completely be present and give all your effort, and then you have to do the exact opposite every day.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything else you want to, this is such a hard question, but I guess the idea is to give people space if there's something they want to say. Is there anything else you wanted to add to that?
No, but that's interesting about the ghost. And that's it.
It's at 3. I mean, she says 3 a.m. I don't know if it's really 3 a.m., but I'm like, oh, that's the liver. So,
Well, that's 3 a.m. Yeah, that's the hour.
That's the hour. And now
And
you're
the
making,
veil is thin, and
well, that's what you're making me think of, because that's what they say, 3 to 6 is when you should be up doing your spiritual practice, or some say 4 to 6. So like when the veil is thin, and so it's like, you have to have that liver needs to be, whether it's the actual organ or how you're seeing in your mind, needs to let go, it needs to stop that storehouse of what is not necessary for you to be present. And I've actually never thought of that before in that exact detail.
Yeah.
This is, to me, is one of the reasons. So like I've mentioned and alluded to, and I've known you for a very long time, and we were recently having this conversation on a back porch, and it wasn't so much the conversation. It was the presence that you had. We were talking about, there was this and there was that, and this is what I expected. And, just as old friends would, and that is necessary, that word old or older. I mean, I don't mind. I want to be here. So I'm not like eschewing my age. I'm like, that's not going to work for me. I don't care. I just want to be as healthy as possible, as healthy as available, but I'm starting to realize there's just this presence when you've known someone. And one of the gifts I had sitting there with you, which you've always had, is like, yep. And I'm like up here and down there, like, oh, it has to be that, like, I'm like always in this, like,
I could be there too, Katie.
You can, and this is not about one above the other, but I think this thing that I've snapshotted, because you're someone I trust and I've known for a long time, which is one of my precursors of being open to people's wisdom, right, was the truth of the presence. And I think when I would have met you in my younger years, to use that word of presence, it would have been efforting really hard and opening my third eye and being really right in the yoga studio. Do you know what I mean? Like what all that word might have meant younger, and sitting in that moment outside, just having a conversation that I could, in my writer self, say it was a big conversation. And I could also say it was a mundane conversation, and both would be true, right? Like, that it's just ends up being this presence, because that is that's how you let go, and that's how you are. Like, that's how you do both at the same time, you know. And I'm remembering now a friend of mine who passed a year ago, which by my estimation, if anyone called me, was too soon. And he passed quickly, like came down from a 11-mile hike with a headache and was dead in 5 days. Like,
Oh,
right. But here's the thing. He almost died in his 20s. So his appraisal of consciousness from then till then has just been like, he was like, his name is Jeffrey Corson, Kate, you know, those people that get it, the way they say your name, like, life is just, oh my God, I saw this tree, you know. he was just so enmeshed with the land that he lived on and the waves that he surfed. And then when he got older, he just gave it back to people. And he had a beloved who he was very close with. And when he passed, there was 4 people with him when he passed, because the doctor was like, you know, it's kind of a miracle that you're like the tumor, you know, he went from having a doctor's visit in an emergency room to losing speech in 3 days. So he went from like literally living to not. And everyone in the room, you know, said peace. Like, even though I could tell the story that it was too soon, and I could tell the story this way that it was wrong, for him, for Jeffrey, for those that were witnessing him, so we can say it's true for him, peace. And his beloved, they met later on in life, but they truly were, I'm not putting them on a perfection pedestal, but just an honest one, which I think is some of the best that you can have in a human relationship, you know.
Yeah.
She says she had a dream, and she said, why am I still here without you? You know, she's like, she's Australian. She's like, I just asked him, like, what? Like,
Yeah.
you know. And he said, you still have more to let go of and let in.
Oh,
And she was told,
so
yeah. And I'm realizing in this moment that of course you would be also the person understanding that.
this is interesting that you should say that, because so last night, as I'm lying in bed, like not able to fall asleep, not able to completely let go, because you asked me last night at like, I don't know what time, if I could do this today. So it was a little in my head. And I thought, you know what? Let me just write a little bit. And I wrote, that it's the, you know, it's the deep-seatedness that we don't even know, like the whatever it is that keeps us stuck in patterns. You know, even when you think you're breaking them, you realize that you keep perpetuating them. When we talked about that.
Absolutely.
I visited, but I said with each go around, there's more awareness and acceptance of what is, more love for how I fit into the spiral. But we don't know. We can't ever know when the soul has fulfilled its purpose in this incarnation. When it has worked out the karmas, it came into this life to experience, clear, and create. So, because there's the 3 karmas, the Sanchita, the Prarabdha, and the Agami, and I'm probably saying the last one wrong, but that, you know, like from way back lifetimes, and then the karma that's recent and like showing up for you to like deal with in the moment. And then it's your action, because karma means your action that is creating future karmas. We don't know why we're here to do. I mean, like, so if you like, sometimes when I get like to like, is this my fault? You know, or did I create how did I create this? We don't know. It could have been from lifetimes. Kind of takes the weight of it off.
Can you read that last line that you wrote about right around clear and create?
So, because we don't know, we can never know when the soul has fulfilled its purpose in this incarnation. When it has worked out the karmas, it came into this life to experience, clear, and create.
I love this.
I love it too.
I love that. I don't need to punctuate any meaning. I think this is truly, I was like, we have to talk immediately. And the intention was in response to that presence. And I'm not putting on a pedestal. I'm just what was. It's how I experienced you. I don't need you to be, I'm not trying to change the story on the podcast. You can be an imperfect human and still a gorgeous human being and friend.
Sure.
And I was just like, I guess that's just really what it is. It's just this presence. And I was thinking about this eclipse, whether, well, it's huge astrologically. It just is. And it's going to be big, however I make meaning of it. And I was like, I don't need life to be easy, but I do need it to be aligned. And so this is my acknowledgement of the alignment. And so to have this
Gosh,
serendipity be the culmination point of the podcast, and Guru Singh, who I like him. I'm not following anybody really a lot, but I like the way he does words. And he says about, I forget the exact number. I think it's like 32,677, but I'm pretty sure I'm wrong. I'm pretty sure I've inverted numbers, but like the 32 is right. Are the number of ancestors and that are sitting in a stadium that allowed your incarnation.
gosh.
And I'm just feeling like in this podcast, there's this, the more we talk, the more there are those that are hearing this openness to clearing and creating, and I think that it's the invitation that I would like to perpetuate.
It's an invitation. Yeah.
And that's the best we can do. We can't control it, but we can shift our focus point, so that while we're fumbling, we're at least trying to fumble towards something of merit. Yeah.
Amen.
I am so grateful that you came on this podcast. And if someone, I guess as a resource share, just in case somebody was listening, if this podcast, I always hope my podcast and the conversations with guests serve in some way. And if this happened onto somebody who might have a beloved or themselves with Alzheimer's or dementia, like what would be like one or two just resources you would say, like, or a book, or, what would be like, is that a fair question? Like, what would you talk out to that person if this is how they found this podcast?
So chances are somebody listening knows somebody, because there's 6 million people in the US that are diagnosed with it, that are just diagnosed, not even, exhibiting symptoms or dealing with it, but that are just diagnosed. So I would, first, of course, go to alz.org. Is the Alzheimer's Association website, and it is like dense. So there is the home office in Chicago, and that's the main site, alz.org, and they have a 24/7 helpline. That is not just like a call center. It's a helpline that's answered by master's level clinicians.
Oh, wow.
Anybody could call at any hour of the day or night. So if you're experiencing, like if you're up at 3 a.m. and your mind is going and you are really struggling, or there's a situation with your loved one that has Alzheimer's, you could call, and that's
beautiful.
And they will be there with their presence, and whatever questions that need asked and answered, they're there. And they could also connect you to any educational programs, we do like a family caregiver conference here in the Northeast region, that's free. And it's like such a great resource. Like all of our services are free, except for like some professional education stuff, but all the services to constituents are always free, all the support groups, all the education. So, you can find that online. You could call the helpline 272, it's 800-272-3900. And I think it's the most amazing thing. And I wish that I had known about it when I had my dad.
Right.
Or if I had known that they did like virtual or online education that was like effective communication strategies, or responding to dementia related behaviors. Like, although I know it, I'm a social worker and this is kind of my field,
It's hard sometimes when you're in the moment to have both parts of your brain talking
No,
to each other.
like,
That's why we
there
have to
is
say it. Yeah.
such good nuggets in those programs. So I would say that's the best resource. And you could also contact your local area agency on aging. Um, Often free home and community-based services that you could get connected to. You get respite care.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I
Yeah.
appreciate you. I am so glad to know you. And thanks for taking the time and bringing some of your presence and your Maine influence and giving us pause, because
Okay.
it'll help us later.
I, as always, love you and your words and how you see things and how you connect things. It's so beautiful.
Thanks, Aim.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning into the Rebirth Podcast. If you enjoy these stories and ingesting inspiration because you understand that what you bring into your field magnifies your field, go on over to Amazon and click on Rebirth, the book, and bring it into your home and share it with your community.